everybody, we're going to get started because Josh has got to get on a flight at 7:50 at RTP, so he's got to get RDU. Yeah, RDU. And so, we got to. He's going to have to come back. All right, I'll talk well on that. All right, so great to see everyone here. Thank you all for coming. I'm Kevin Hales. I'm an attorney for the SAS Institute in Cary. I'm head of the Lawyers Chapter of the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society is an organization of 40,000 lawyers, or over 40, not exactly 40,000. Lawyers, law students, scholars, and other individuals who believe and trust that individual citizens can make the best choices for themselves.
We can make America great again.
Yes, we can make. Is that the right hand up? Correct? Is that
pledge?
God help us. The Triangle Lawyers Chapter is one of numerous local chapters that seek to foster serious dialogue about issues of individual liberty. Today, we're happy to have Professor Josh Blackmun here to speak with us. He is an associate professor of law at the South Texas College of Law. He specializes in constitutional law in the U.S. Supreme Court, as well as the intersection of law and technology. He's the author of the critically acclaimed, and I looked it up on Amazon, it was critically acclaimed, unprecedented.
Mostly criticized.
Unprecedented, the constitutional challenge to Obamacare, that was from 2013. And the new book, Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. He was selected by Forbes magazine for the 30 Under 30 in Law and Policy. He is an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. He is the founder and president of the Harlan Institute and the founder of Fantasy SCOTUS, which is billed as the internet's premier Supreme Court fantasy league. Right. He blogs at joshblackmun.com. He's director of judicial research at Let's Predict, which is a legal analytics service provider, which is probably something that's going to be happening a lot more. I work at SAS, and legal analytics is a burgeoning field. Josh is the author of over 24 law review articles, and his commentaries appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, LA Times, USA Today, and other places as well. Thank you very much for him coming, and please give a warm welcome to Josh Blackmun.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here in Raleigh. It's my first time in the city. I actually had a chance to visit your Capitol and your History Museum, and I love traveling the country to get to see different parts of our great nation. So I'm here today with a very sad topic. I've been giving this talk since September of how to select next Supreme Court justice. But as of about 3 weeks ago, this topic took in a great sadness. Justice Scalia was a giant. And the moment I was watching his funeral, his procession to the Supreme Court, it became real. To see the other justice standing next to him, looking on at this loss, made me cry. I don't cry easily. But this vacancy, this absence of Justice Scalia creates a serious issue, not just for the court, but indeed for our nation. Because whoever replaces Justice Scalia on the bench will largely affect the direction of our country for a generation. And I don't say that lightly. The next president, whomever John Roberts swears in on January 20th, 2017, will reshape the Supreme Court. He already has one vacancy. Justice Ginsburg will be 83. Justice Kennedy will be 81. Justice Briar will be 78. So the next president will have certainly one and perhaps as many as 4 vacancies. Now, if you notice, I said next president. President Obama is not getting anyone confirmed. The Republicans, for perhaps the first time in my adult life, have held firm on something. That may change, but as of now, Senator Grassley and Senator McConnell seem rock solid on this. President Obama will very likely appoint someone that will play the right chords and pluck the right strings, but I think there's a very low chance they will get confirmed. So I'll be working under the assumption that the next president will pick a justice, and that whoever President Obama picks here will not get much, won't even get a hearing. One brief note on that, just while I have your attention. One of the arguments today is that the Senate has a constitutional duty to vote or to even hold a hearing on the president's nominees. That's rubbish. The Constitution says the president shall nominate, shall means must, the president is required to make a nomination, and the Senate gives it what's called advice and consent. Their advice can be no, right? Their advice can be pick someone else. Their advice can be leave the seat empty, and the Constitution says nothing else beyond that. There's nothing in the Constitution about holding a hearing. Indeed, I think judicial hearings are a waste of time. So if they're going to vote no, cut to the chase and vote no anyway. But we should start thinking ahead at how the next president should pick a justice. And I start from the proposition that over the last 40 years, Republican presidents have been very bad at this. During the Burger courts, the Rehnquist courts, the Roberts courts, Republican presidents have not done a particularly effective job at appointing justices. So if you consider, of the last 7 presidents to make SCOTUS nominations, only 2 have been Democrats, Obama and Clinton. So you would think, of the last 18 justices appointed, if all but 2 of them were by Democratic presidents, there would be a lot of conservative justices. But such is not the case. So if you actually look at how, I apologize for reading off the side of the sheet, but how things are broken down. We've had 2 Democratic presidents appoint 4 justices. You've had 5 Republican presidents appoint 14. So looking at this, we think, wow, we must have like the most conservative Supreme Court in the world, right? With all these Republican appointments to the Supreme Court. But it hasn't worked out like this. And I'm going to show you a shift. Ready? Watch for this. Ready? Boom. What if I miss it? Boom. The fact of the matter is, quite a number of Republican appointments have been busts. Talking to Justice Blackmun, Justice John Paul Stevens, Justice Souter, all appointed by Republicans, all turned out to be quite liberal. And indeed, you've had several of the so-called moderates, Justice Powell, Justice O'Connor, and Justice Kennedy. They're sometimes on the left, sometimes on the right, but they're nowhere near Justice Thomas. And if there's like a little question mark for the Chief Justice, John Roberts finds a way to break my heart every year. Every year he breaks my heart. I don't know how he'll break my heart this year, but he will, I promise. So he breaks my heart without fail. Justice Thomas never breaks my heart. No. So actually the genesis of my invitation here, and my kind of thanks to Kevin for inviting me. In September, I wrote an article with Randy Barnett in the Weekly Standard called Select the Next Justice. In hindsight, this cover is now a little creepy because it's coming to fruition. We will see that each of these justices is replaced by an empty chair in the near future. And it's of the utmost importance that we select a justice with care and we not mess this up. So the first lesson that I think we have to learn from this process is that bruising confirmation hearings are worth it. They're worth it. And the reason why they're worth it is the Supreme Court nomination lasts for decades. So we start our story with this man. Oh, in memory of President Reagan, his wife passed away yesterday. One of President Reagan's biggest decisions was appointing justices. And President Reagan appointed Robert Bork to the U.S. Supreme Court. Bork, a distinguished scholar, a circuit court judge, a brilliant man by all accounts. Judge Bork would never make it through. His confirmation hearings turned into a fiasco. Why? Because Democratic senators like Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy resolved not to let this man through. And really, for the first time ever, a Supreme Court justice of unquestionable qualifications was voted down purely on the basis of ideology. After Judge Bork was voted down, President Reagan scrambled. He selected this man, Doug Ginsburg, another D.C. Circuit judge, to be appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Doug Ginsburg was a brilliant scholar, well respected. But soon, National Public Radio discovered, Nina Totenberg reported, that Doug Ginsburg had smoked marijuana with his students while at Harvard. At one point, smoking marijuana was disqualification for a job, a public service. Today, I think it's probably an addition to your resume. So after Judge Ginsburg withdrew, President Reagan had to scramble. And he made a decision that we're still living with today. Not even a week after Ginsburg withdrew, they went down the list, and finally found a Sacramento Republican by the name of Anthony Michael Kennedy. Now, not Anthony Michael Hall, Anthony Michael Kennedy. See General Meese smiling in the background. Kennedy was a compromise pick. He was someone who they thought would sail right through. And indeed, Lawrence, Tribe, and everyone else said, great, give us Kennedy. What a savior this will be for us. Biden and Kennedy, unsurprisingly, were very happy by this nomination. Kennedy sailed through, I think it was 97-0 or close to it. That's the first indication something was awry. The next nomination came a few years later when William Brennan, the liberal lion of the Supreme Court, retired. And this gave President George H.W. Bush the opportunity of a lifetime. The same way that Barack Obama could have replaced Scalia, Bush could have replaced Brennan. It's of the same gravity. Biden and Kennedy said, we will not let anyone through. They made it clear that they would put up a fight. They would not let George H.W. Bush replace William Brennan with someone like Edith Jones. So, President Bush's advisors, John Sununu among others, decided a different strategy. Rather than appointing someone with a known record, they would appoint a stealth justice. A stealth justice who would sail through the confirmation hearings and not arouse any suspicion. The man they chose was a New Hampshire judge by the name of David Hackett Souter. Souter had been a justice on the New Hampshire Supreme Court for a number of years, and he had been a First Circuit judge for about 5 minutes. He'd been there for less than a year. Souter was selected because he thought this is a conservative with no record. He will sail through. And people like Warren Rudman, John Sununu, and Boyd and Gray, they all vouched for David Souter. And you can see David Souter here, and I've been looking at the camera, looking away meekly. At the time, no one knew who this guy was, right? Who is this David Souter fellow, right? Who is John Galt? Who is he? There was no record. And ultimately, the decision was not a hard one for Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy. They gave him some angst, but he sailed through. Once again, Biden said, we dodged a bullet. By the way, Joe Biden's greatest contributions from American history were not as VP. They were as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee for the nominations of Kennedy, Thomas, and Souter. Those were his most important contributions to world history. As vice president, he generated some funny onion headlines, but not much more. The next vacancy that arose was barely a year later, where Justice Thurgood Marshall, the great civil rights champion, could not stick around anymore. He was too old. He was trying to live to a Democratic president, but he could not do it. So once again, H.W. Bush was faced with an amazing opportunity to reshape the Supreme Court. He knew this one would occasion a political fight between the Republicans and the Democrats. What he probably didn't know was how controversial his nominee would be. H.W. nominated this man, Clarence Thomas. Thomas had been the longtime commissioner of the EEOC, and he had been a Court of Appeals judge in the District of Columbia Circuit. Thomas had a strong reputation as a conservative, but no one quite knew how conservative he was. I don't think President George Bush even knew how conservative he was. Because if he had known, I doubt he would have nominated him. So if any of you are watching HBO, there's a new documentary, there's a new movie called Confirmation, starring Kerry Washington, which tells the story of Justice Thomas's nomination. The Thomas hearings may have started off with smiles, but they soon turned to be very, very, very dangerous. Joe Biden attacked Thomas for, among other things, reading Richard Epstein's books. Richard Epstein's book on takings. Biden said that anyone who reads a book on Richard Epstein does not belong in the Supreme Court. Yes, good job, Joe. Richard Epstein is a scholar of the highest order. But then the hearings took on a direction that no one anticipated. A woman named Anita Hill, who had worked with Thomas at the EEOC, made allegations that he had sexually harassed her. I remember the Diet Coke can, right? These are things you remember. To his credit, and this is to his credit, I'll give Biden credit where it's due, he did not let the hearings turn into a circus. He could have prevented a vote and held a new hearing so Anita Hill could testify again. He did not do that. So to Biden's credit, he let Thomas through. But everything else was pretty awful. Ultimately, Thomas was confirmed. He was getting sworn in by Justice Byron White. The chief was out that day. And we saw what happens. By the way, I love this picture. This was actually taken after Sonia Sotomayor's investiture. And you can see Biden and Thomas 2 steps away. Nino is a veritable wall between them. Quite literally. You can see his girth. He was pretty thick. The rope hides him. He was pretty wide in this picture. So what happens next? I'm going to skip the nominations of Ginsburg and Briar. And the reason why I'll skip them is that Democrats tend to be very good at picking justices. Even when they pick a so-called moderate like Briar, he votes just like Ginsburg most of the time. Consider the difference between Thomas and Souter and Ginsburg and Briar. There's a very, very small difference between Ginsburg and Briar. So the next anecdote I want to discuss is this. Harriet Miers. Harriet Miers. So in a very brief span in 2005, President George W. Bush was given the chance of once again reshaping the Supreme Court. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor had announced her retirement, and Bush nominated a man named John Roberts to fill her seat. But then suddenly, William Rehnquist, the chief, died. Bush elevated Roberts to the Chief Justice seat. Okay? Bush elevated Roberts to the Chief Justice seat. And then who would he have to replace Sandra Day O'Connor? Well, initially he chose Harriet Miers. Who the heck was Harriet Miers? His legal counsel. I love this cartoon. The problem with the Harriet Miers nomination, and this is actually foundational, the person responsible for vetting Harriet Miers worked for Harriet Miers. Can you imagine that? The person responsible for investigating her history was her subordinate. That is a recipe for disaster. The next big clue that something was awry was that Harriet Miers was endorsed by no less than Chuck Schumer and Harry Reid. They were ebullient, saying, "Yes, oh thank God, right? Replace her with this judge who has no, was a judge who was a lawyer who had no record of constitutional law." The Miers nomination ended very quickly. As she met with senators in their offices, even Republican senators said, "This is a really bad idea." Slate magazine had the Harriet Miers-ometer. Throughout the term, her chances of getting confirmed kept dipping down and down and down, until ultimately she withdrew her nomination. And President Bush was able to nominate Samuel Alito for the space. I'll come back to the Alito and Roberts nominations in a few minutes. But I'd like to discuss what the next Supreme Court nomination will look like. And again, I am working under the assumption that President Obama's nominee, whoever he or she may be, will not get a hearing. I'm working under that assumption. I may be wrong, but I think I'm right. The most significant event in judicial appointments in recent years has been the so-called nuclear option. For decades, any judicial nominee would only need, of course, 50 votes to be confirmed. But under the rules of the Senate, cloture, right, that is the ability to vote for a nominee, required 60. So as a consequence, every single nominee needed 60 votes, basically filibuster, to get a vote. Throughout the Bush presidency, when Democrats were in the Senate minority, they routinely blocked Bush's judges, men like Miguel Estrada and Charles Pickering and others, in a very, unprecedented manner. The second President Obama was nominated, Republicans did the same. He blocked a number of Senate of Obama's nominees. So in 2014, Senator Harry Reid decided to do a filibuster. This was a so-called nuclear option. So now, under the Senate rules, to appoint any circuit court or district court judge, you only need a bare majority. You only need 50 votes, or actually 51 votes. Supreme Court still requires a filibuster, but that can be changed by a simple rule change of majority. So we are now working under different calculus. It is no longer the case that you need 60 votes to confirm a justice. The new magic number is 51. And that's significant. Why is it significant? You no longer need to appeal to moderates. You can go straight up 51 vote, party line vote, and get someone onto the courts. Of course, now that the shoe's on the foot, Republicans don't very much like the nuclear option. They considered it before. And the Constitution says nothing at all about this. But because of Reid's nomination and Reid's decision, the next president will be faced with a very difficult choice. Right? He only needs 50 votes to confirm. This raises a curious question. Now, I have been giving this talk now for about 6 months. And at this point, I would usually bring up the question of what I call the Clint Eastwood option, the empty chair option. So let me discuss how I used to talk about it, and I'll update it. Imagine, if you will, that there's a Republican president in 2017 with a vacancy, and the Senate is controlled by Democrats. The Democrats say, we will not confirm anyone. The Republican president says, okay, that's fine. I'll let the seat stay open the next election. So Republicans take the House, and they confirm a justice. So the question was this: what is better, confirming a moderate with the Democrats' consent, or letting a seat open for a year or so until the Republican Senate confirm a justice is conservative? Which is better? And I've been asking this question now for some time, and indeed, the risk inherent in that is exactly what's playing out now. By the Republicans saying they will not compromise with President Obama on a so-called moderate. I don't think they're moderates, but assuming it's a moderate, it raises the distinct possibility that perhaps President Hillary Clinton will go nominate someone very far out of the mainstream. But it's a risk that maybe ought to be considered, especially in light of the fact that even though the so-called moderates aren't going to be that much different than the so-called radicals. But we are now in a position where we will probably have a seat that's empty in the court for maybe 1 term, possibly 2, and there's a distinct possibility that if there's a divided government, a Republican president, Democrat Senate, no one will be confirmed. We are now in what I call a thermonuclear option, right? This is a thermonuclear option. We can just have seats being empty for a long period of time unless some sort of legislative compromise can be reached. I don't know how this one shakes out, my friends. I really don't. And we're in uncharted territory. This could resolve itself if a Republican president and a Republican Senate, but sooner or later we will get to the point where there's a party of the president and a party of the Senate online, and no one gets confirmed at all. And the court may, for extended periods, have less than 9 justices. We need to discuss this. I think it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen now, it'll happen in a few years. But I've been talking about this for months, and here we are. So, what do I know? The second lesson that I think we ought to learn is that paper trails are an asset. Oops. Paper trails are an asset. What do I mean by that? We do not want blank slates. My apologies to Taylor Swift. We do not want blank slates on the Supreme Court. We do not want ships drifting the water without sails, right? We do not want, we want judges, you like that, right? We want judges who have a fortitude, who have a strength. What's that? Nothing. The peanut gallery, right? So, I'll get to that in a minute. So when John Roberts was being considered for the Supreme Court, one of his perceived strengths was the fact that he was something of a stealth justice. Well, he wasn't a Souter stealth justice, right? He wasn't this guy from the boonies of New Hampshire who no one knew. He had been a D.C. lawyer for many years. He'd worked for the Reagan Justice Department. He worked for the Bush Justice Department. He was a known quantity, right? He was a conservative lawyer. He was known. Had he ever written anything about the Constitution? Not really. Had he ever given a speech on his view of the law? Not really. Had he ever told his friends what he thought about anything? Suspiciously no. We didn't know what his deal was, but everyone said, oh, we know John Roberts. He's a conservative. He's a conservative. We can no longer go in this conjecture. Because as we saw with the Chief's decision in the Obamacare case, not once but twice, it breaks my heart every year, the Chief has a view of the law that perhaps is not what many thought it was. Another stealth nominee was Elena Kagan. Even though she had been a professor for nearly 2 decades, she wrote like 3 law review articles. I read more than her this year. She just did not write a lot. I guess it wasn't interesting to her. Also, she went out of her way never to take positions on anything controversial. This was her MO. Kagan, too, was considered a stealth justice. She clerked for Justice Blackmun. She clerked for, I think, for Judge Mikva on the D.C. Circuit. I'm sorry, Justice Marshall on the Supreme Court, Judge Mikva on the D.C. Circuit. But she had never really taken a position, but people knew in her heart that she was a good liberal. We'll see. A number of years ago, an article was written about the so-called Little Supremes, right? Who are the Little Supremes? These are people who really want to be judges, really want to be judges. So in order to become a judge, they go out of the way never to say anything of controversy on any topic. They don't tell people to think about the Constitution. They don't tell people they think about affirmative action, or abortion, or gay marriage, or federalism, because they don't want to trip off their confirmation hearings. We do not want these people on the federal bench. We do not want these people on the federal bench because we don't know what they're going to do, right? Once they're on the court, they're out of our hair. We can't think about them anymore. But up to that point, we want a track record of improving. This is actually a picture of Elena Kagan from our high school yearbook wearing a judicial robe. And her high school yearbook photo is a Felix Frankfurter quote. Government is itself an art, one of the subtlest parts. I think it's a very fitting quote for Elena. And this is Sam Alito's high school yearbook. I love this quote. It's hard to read, but it says, Sam intends to go to law school and eventually to warm a seat on the Supreme Court. Indeed, Sam did. So actually, I'll turn now to a quote from a law professor at Stanford. Her name is Pamela Karlan, who's quite liberal, although I'm a fan of hers. And she said, if I can read it, would I like to be on the Supreme Court? You bet I would. But not enough to have trimmed my sails for half a lifetime. Okay, she said, in a lawyer, courage is a muscle. You develop courage by exercising it. Sitting on the fence is not practice for standing up. Sitting on the fence is not practice for standing up. It's hard taking a position, right? If I write an article on the Second Amendment, I'm going to get attacked for it. If I write a book about Obamacare, I'm going to get attacked for it. But you take the position, you take the arrows. We want judges to have taken those arrows and know what to do with it. Not someone who can bend and flip them. Especially when they're dealing with this town, right? As Mark Leibovich called it, Washington, D.C. Still a $100 bill sitting out of his pocket. D.C. has a pernicious influence. This is why I love leaving that area and coming to the heartland of America, like Raleigh. But, D.C. has an effect on people. Be very careful. Now, going back to the Chief Justice, after the Obamacare decision was decided, Glenn Beck started selling T-shirts that called John Roberts a coward, right? I think the problem with John Roberts, if I can sum it up in one sentence, is he cares more about John Marshall than about James Madison. I think Marshall. My students, I always call Roberts Marshall. It's actually this awful tip, but I do it all the time. John Roberts cares so deeply about the Supreme Court, and how it's perceived, that I think that actually trumps when he thinks about the Constitution itself. He's more worried about how the Supreme Court is perceived than if, in fact, the Constitution is being complied with. This, I think, is a problem. The third lesson of this talk is that we need to move away from these cliched calls for judicial restraint. Now, at least since the Reagan years, there's been this ongoing debate about judicial activism and judicial restraint and this imperial judiciary, right, chopping off the limbs of our government. I think these terms are largely unhelpful. The idea of what's restraint and what's activist, it adds nothing. And to give you an example why, I'll talk about Obamacare for a minute, right, the Affordable Care Act case. In the Affordable Care Act case, there were two very different approaches to the Constitution. I'll start with the joint dissent, which was joined by Justice Samuel Alito. In the joint dissent, Justice Alito wrote, with Scalia, Kennedy, and Thomas, that the individual mandate of Obamacare cannot be justified under the Constitution. It cannot be a regulation of commerce to compel someone to engage in commercial activity. Therefore, said Justice Alito, Obamacare is unconstitutional in its entirety. The controlling opinion by John Roberts, whose piercing blue eyes break my heart every year, the controlling opinion by Justice Roberts agreed that the Commerce Clause cannot be used to justify the individual mandate. He agreed with that. However, after spending nearly 30 pages, which my lawsuits still have to read, explaining why the Commerce Clause cannot be used to justify the mandate, he turned to the taxing power. And concerning the taxing power, he said it's not a tax. It isn't part of legal. Yet he said it's not actually a tax. However, because as a court we have a duty to save the law, I will treat it as if it were a tax. This was a so-called saving construction. But it wasn't just a saving construction. He rewrote the law. Congress and the president assiduously avoided calling it a tax. Why? Because there are political ramifications for calling something a tax. Who wants to raise taxes when the president promises no taxes? John Roberts rewrote the law. He also rewrote the Medicaid expansion. He said that the Medicaid expansion is unconstitutional unless states choose to enter into it. This was not the law. So actually today we have this weird situation like in Texas where I live where there's no Medicaid expansion. If you're at this weird rub where you're too rich for Medicaid but not poor enough for the Obamacare subsidies, you get nothing. The ACA we have now is this weird nether region created by John Roberts. I humbly submit that what he did was not an act of restraint, but an act of judicial hubris. He rewrote the individual mandate. He rewrote the Medicaid expansion. 3 years later, at King v. Burwell, he broke my heart again, he rewrote the statute saying established by the state means established by the federal government. This is not an act of restraint. And now, when the press and the media knows that with a little bit of pressure, the chief will do what he's going to do, it's a very dangerous precedent for 30 years. My friends, for a preview of things to come this June, there will be so much pressure on John Roberts to be the statuette, the Chief Justice for all of us, to be above politics, not to rule with a shorthanded court, to uphold the abortion decision, right? To uphold President Obama's affirmative action order, immigration order, to uphold all this stuff. Just you wait. Just you wait. The chief is not throwing balls and strikes; he's throwing curveballs. A book I'd actually recommend for you is actually by a guy named Clark Neely from the Institute for Justice. It's called Terms of Engagement. Clark is a lawyer who litigates economic liberty cases. And he discusses very powerfully why this entire debate over activism and restraint doesn't make much sense. Lesson number 4. We need to shift the way we think about picking judges, right? Every single judge since, 1973 has been asked, what do you think about Roe v. Wade? And the answer is always, I can't talk about pending cases. What do you think about District Point v. Heller? I can't talk about these cases. What do you think about, now the Vergaful, the same-sex marriage issue? I can't talk about that. We need to move away from talking about specific cases and think about broader ideas. So to give you an example, it would have been, this is actually covered. It would have been unheard of to think about asking John Roberts and Sam Alito, what do you think about a mandate requiring people to buy insurance, right? We could not have known that was a big issue. Or imagine asking Justice Kagan and Ginsburg, what do you think about locking people up in Cuba if you're capturing Afghanistan, right? Would that be okay? We couldn't have thought about the Guantanamo cases. Or even Bush v. Gore, right? How could we anticipate the fact of Bush v. Gore? This illustrates, I think, why litmus tests are a silly idea. We can't know what the next major constitutional controversy will be. All we can know is that methodology. And this is where I think things like originalism and textualism is so much more important than asking, what do you think about a specific case? Because a framework will guide you on your way regardless of what comes. But asking John Roberts what do you think about Guantanamo, right? And that's why Roberts was picked. He thought he solved the war of terror. Does not help you with Obamacare. The final lesson, and this is how number 4 is actuated, is instead of asking judges, what do you think of Heller? What do you think of Roe? What do you think of Lawrence? Ask them about clauses of the Constitution. Ask that, for example. How would you understand the original meaning of the Second Amendment? Do you know that during her confirmation hearing, Sonia Sotomayor was asked about Heller, and she said Heller was, quote, settled law. Settled law. Not even a year later, barely a year later, in city of McDonald, McDonald, the city of Chicago, Sotomayor basically voted to overturn Heller. Not even a year after calling Heller settled law, she basically voted to overturn it. During Elena Kagan's confirmation hearing, she was asked, does the Constitution guarantee a right to federal same-sex marriage? Is there a federal right to same-sex marriage? She said, of course not. Not even 3 years later, in Bergefell, she voted to uphold the right to same-sex marriage. Asking these sorts of questions gets you nothing because the justices know if they give you the truth, it won't get confirmed. So they make up these dodges and other answers. And frankly, once they're in the court, they can do whatever they want. They're not bound by stare decisis. So let's at least try to endeavor to engage a justice in history, right? How do you understand the Commerce Clause as it was originally understood, right? What's your understanding of the full faith and credit clause? How should we go about interpreting statutes, right? What's your view on legislative history, right? Actual meaningful questions they can't dodge. Because frankly, these confirmation hearings have been an absolute joke. I'm actually working an article now, and the thesis is going to be we should eliminate all judicial confirmation hearings. Get rid of them. They serve absolutely no purpose. Okay, why? First, a candidate knows the more they say, the more they'll be in trouble. So they have every incentive to just sit there cagey and say as little as possible, hope they sail through. And second, if a senator actually asks a meaningful question, the answer is always the same. Oh, I can't answer that because they implicate a case off to serve on. Okay? These hearings are jokes. They're jokes. They don't add any value other than posturing. And really, they put the nominee in an awkward spot. Because you're making these judges or these professors or whoever they are sit in front of a committee and ask these questions they know they can't answer, and it's embarrassing. Get rid of them. Dump them. If there are enough votes for the candidate, vote them up. If not, vote them down. You can have private meetings in chambers, private meetings in your office. You can send them interrogatories, get all the written statements, which we already do, but the hearing should be abolished for all judicial nominees. So the next justice, and again, I don't think we'll get one before January 2017, well, a lot to think about for the president who is going to select. And this is probably the most, if not the most important issue of the election, it's definitely the top 5. And as we vote, we should think very carefully about this and think who will be the president to pick our next justice. So I thank you all for your attention, and I welcome all of your questions. Thank you so much. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I sense that you're uncomfortable with the idea of this seat on the Supreme Court going vacant for a year or maybe 2. Why?
I'm only uncomfortable to the extent it sets a weird precedent, right? Because the longer this seat stays open, the longer the next seat stays open. And this is a one-way ratchet to have a very dangerous appointment process. I don't think it'll be particularly problematic for the court to hold over a couple cases this year. In fact, a few of them are really good to hold over. So, for example, the immigration case, the United States versus Texas, I talked about this at Duke this morning. The next president will likely, 50% chance, rescind President Obama's executive action on immigration. Just cancel it. This case goes away. The contraceptive mandate case, right? The next president very well may expand the conscious exemption to exclude groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor from the Obamacare mandate. This case goes away. Those cases don't need to be decided now. Even cases, for example, there's an abortion case from Texas, there's an affirmative action case from Texas, it's a very Texas term this year. Even if the court doesn't decide those now, they'll come back up in the near future. So I don't think it's actually critical that the court have 9 justices. In fact, I've been talking about this for months. I think the court can survive with less than 9 justices. I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal about 2 weeks ago chronicling all the times when the court was shorthanded. For example, Robert Jackson, the great Nuremberg prosecutor, he didn't resign from the Supreme Court. He left the court for a year to go prosecute Nazis. They were shorthanded for a very long time. They survived. William Douglas had a stroke. He was basically out of office for a year and a half until his confirmation was held for Justice Stevens. They survived. The court was actually down to 7 justices before Rehnquist and Powell were confirmed. So there's actually a history here of the court operating shorthanded. So I'm not particularly concerned about it, but I think we should be attuned to what precedent does it set going forward. Yes, sir.
Tell me if I'm correct in this, that by law, the Senate goes out of session on the 3rd of January.
Yes, sir. By the Constitution, not by law, by the Constitution.
By the Constitution.
Yes, sir.
So Obama's got 17 days to make a recess appointment.
So this is actually called the thermonuclear option. So let me explain what the gentleman's asking about. By the Constitution, the new Senate seated on January 3rd, 2017. President Obama is in office until January 20th. So imagine the situation. A Democratic Senate is seated on January 3rd. For 17 days, President Obama will have a Democratic Senate. They could just eliminate all procedural rules and just confirm someone right away. Forget a recess. They can confirm a lifetime appointment in 17 days. Or they can get a 2-year recess appointment and confirm someone that way. That's why if Republicans lose the Senate in November, this discussion changes a bit. Because if there's a Republican president with a Democrat Senate coming in, the Democrats may be incentivized to run the table and rush someone through in this fast 17 days. Unless Ted Cruz can filibuster for 17 days straight, I don't think he has that much stamina. There may be some problems, but that's a possibility. What? That'd be impressive.
I mean, is the risk really that great? And I asked that because you showed that graph earlier. The pictures, when a justice gets confirmed, the flow has always been the left. It was the last 7 presidential appointments.
Yes, sir.
There's no stealth candidates that ever got appointed and they moved to the left.
The exception is Briar, White, Fields, Frankfurter, and Robert Jackson. That's about it.
Well,
That's about it.
yeah. So since it's Nixon forward,
Yeah.
it's all going to the left. So is it really? I mean, I'm conservative. I'm desperate for the court to be changed. I guess it's.
So that's why you have to start.
It
That's
doesn't seem like it's that big of a risk because you could end up in the scenario you just talked about.
well. That's why you need to start with someone who has a track record. You know who they are. Sam Alito, there's no question what he believed. He was a circuit judge for 15 years, right? He had a proven track record. John Roberts, not so much. We got 50-50 with that. But Alito's been pretty solid. Nino Scalia had been a constitutional law scholar for decades, and admin law scholar for years. He had a record. Yes, sir.
This is like a paradigm a little bit simplistic in the sense that you've got the Republican presidents along this abstract way. You find, hey,
So
it has changed. Right?
the fact of the matter is, George H.W. Bush wasn't that conservative. H.W. Bush did not view the Supreme Court as a priority. This is why I'll humbly submit when you're picking the next president, choosing a president who knows about the Supreme Court and is committed is a very important factor, right? The president must have judicial nominations as a priority. So even George W. Bush, who was rock solid in the Courts of Appeals, when it came time to it, picked Harriet Miers, right, over a number of their more qualified candidates. We need to not have that again. Yes, sir.
What has been said about who you might pick or
So, I'm going to resist because the federal side I'm talking about specific candidates, but in general, I think what you have to recognize is any candidate must make judgment of commitment. The reason why is that there's serious political capital that must be spent to put a nominee on the court, and unless a politician is willing to burn that political capital, he'll then compromise it away and deal. It's about how much political capital, because if you fight for justice, you may lose another battle. You only have so much, room to negotiate. But it's something to consider. Yes, sir.
We have in this easier district, now we have the longest pending district court opening in the country for 10 years.
Wow.
Largely because senators held their blue slips one way or the other. You see the filibuster go by the wayside. Any thoughts on whether we see the blue slip process go by the wayside?
So I think what we'll see is, I've actually thought about this before. Because the blue slip is so significant, it's basically taking the place of the filibuster after the nuclear option. So I think what you'll see is when you have a state like Texas, for example, where there's no blue slip, presidents get more creative with their nominations. But in a state where the party of the Senate is different than the party of the president, they'll be more moderate and compromise. So in fact, the blue slip is going to be the biggest check. Of course, for the Supreme Court, there's no blue slip. But the circuit and district is absolutely true. Right hand. Yes, sir. Oh, Justice Walt's a good friend. He was actually at my talk. I gave this talk in Austin 3 weeks ago. Go ask George Bull about that. But I think I think Justice Walt's a great asset to Texas, and I'm very glad he's on our board. I don't want to lose him. Anyone else has a question yet? Yes, sir.
Do you think if we eat a lot of organic kale and that kind of thing, we might
If we
live?
allowed what?
If we eat a lot of organic kale and that
Oh,
sort of
God.
thing, do you think we'll live long enough to see some impeachments?
Well, I don't eat kale. I refuse to, as a matter of principle. I don't eat broccoli either because of Obamacare.
Impeachments on the court.
I don't do no broccoli. So the question was here as an impeachment, right? So you want to impeach judges?
Yeah.
Who do you want to impeach?
Well, we could start with RBG.
She's old. Go. You know. I mean, look. We've had very few impeachments of judges, right? We just haven't had many of them in our nation's history. If we start impeaching liberal justices when they make liberal decisions, then when the shoes in their foot, we'll start impeaching like Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas. I don't know how we'll go down the road of impeaching for merely ideological differences. That may be a bridge too far. Yes. Yeah.
If the Senate case, who might be the example or examples that you could say somebody Obama might have? Should the Senate case? Any ideas?
I mean, look. So you can see the names being bandied about in the news. I used this example, right? Is he going to pick a Ginsburg or is he going to pick a Briar? What's the difference between Ginsburg and Briar? Not much, right? Briar, the so-called moderate, Ginsburg, was a proud liberal. What's the difference between the two of them? Maybe 1 or 2 cases a year, but in the big 5-4, they're together. So, without naming names, I don't think it matters. Yes. Go first.
It strikes me about Justice Roberts. I completely agree with you that he's an activist judge. Whatever you call him, he's rewritten the law several times in order to preserve it. And it does seem that he's more interested in the court's legacies and that kind of thing than upholding the Constitution right and all. At the same time, I think of 2 free speech cases that he took that he agreed and wrote the opinions for at least one of them, where they're very unpopular. One was the Souter Phelps case, and also the what is it called, the step on
Crush films?
Yeah, that's right. And both of those.
Steven.
Right, yeah. Where he took unpopular positions and he put them.
I think the free speech cases are different from federal cases, right? Roberts wakes up in the morning, has a cereal, says, "How can I defer to Congress instead?" Right? His MO is, "How can I defer to Congress? How can I let Congress do what they want to do?" And unless it's about the Voting Rights Act, in which case it no longer matters. But for the most part, he likes deferring to Congress. Voting Rights Act, I can't figure out that. That must have been some sort of pre-existing, pet peeve he had. Yes, sir.
I'm beguiled by your suggestion. I'm beguiled because I thought this was warning me that you're going to have hearings. That you focus on important things like, what is your jurisprudence? Are you a textualist originalist? Or are you one of these people that thinks that this is just a collection of words that you can reinterpret as you decide? I think it was placed that strongly before the it said how to take words.
So,
And I think it would be much more likely that Americans don't like it. Once they understand what a living constitution is, I don't think they like it.
So,
But the problem is we never get control.
if you read Sonia Sotomayor's confirmation hearing, you would swear she was Nina Scalia's sister, right? She gets up and expects text the statute, follow the meaning of what Congress, She basically said she was a textualist.
It's not about the constitution.
Oh, she did not say living constitutional. She said,
No, but you need to drill down, obviously.
So again, the second you start drilling into them, so with respect to the senators, they're not, for the most part,
You're dumb.
I didn't say that.
I said,
The senators are not equipped to drill down a judge or an appellate lawyer or a law professor on these kind of things, right? Our profession, and I speak to lawyers in this room, is not giving away your cards, right? We're trained to that very well. And the senators are in a position where everyone just dumps whatever they think onto the microphone. So I think there's almost a disconnect between the skill set of being a senator and the skill set necessary to interrogate a judge. There's a disconnect there. So I think your point's well taken. And I think there are some senators who are able to answer these questions in a very meaningful manner, but that's the minority.
So I'm not sure if any other, maybe one more.
Yes, take one more question? Yes, ma'am, in the back.
So we realize that the Supreme Court is really important despite these records are getting more and more contentious. Is there anything behind the idea of having more of a check on the Supreme Court, whether it's, Supreme Courts in the states that overturn Supreme Courts? I mean, until we get that.
So you're asking about the Article 5 project. So this is my home state of Texas. Governor Greg Abbott has introduced a number of proposals to amend the Constitution, one of which is that 3/4 of the state can override the Supreme Court. Look, I don't have any particular vision on that idea, but I don't have any problem with amending the Constitution to alter our balance of powers, right? I mean, we started off with the senators being selected by the state legislatures. The Constitution changed that with the 17th Amendment. That radically altered our system of government, right? Radically, in ways that I don't think they anticipated, right? The states are relevant.
very bad year.
Which one?
1913.
Yeah.
The two amendments.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have income tax, you have back-to-back with the senatorial election clause. So, we can consider these things. I mean, if 3/4 of the states agree that a Supreme Court decision is awful, maybe the court screwed up. I thank you all so much for your attention and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
You guys can continue hanging around. We have the flights for a while, but we got to get him to a flight.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.